I'm Leela Singh, your podcast host, and I'd like to welcome you to the My Brand HQ podcast, all things personal branding for career acceleration. This podcast is for talented, ambitious career professionals like you who are wanting to be perceived as a thought leader, to be top of mind to those that matter, and to make an impact and stand out, be that in your team, your organization, or your industry, and to be inspired by other successful leaders. I will be interviewing high-achieving career professionals who have carved out a successful career in their field and are open to sharing their career journey, their challenges, their learnings and insights with you, someone who is looking to establish your personal brand and accelerate your career. Through my personal branding and coaching practice, I enable career professionals primarily in the technology industry to earn more money, to increase their salary. In fact, I spoke to all of my past clients that I've worked with over several years and learned that actually overall, they've received an average of 47% increase in their package. Would that be a great place to be? They've also all achieved at least one, if not more, promotions or moved on to a higher level in their career at another organization. And they're looking to advance their career while showing up as the best version of themselves. If this sounds like you, then do reach out to me and let's have a chat. And why do I do this? Well, during my corporate career spanning 25 years, I quickly realized that hard work alone was not enough to get me to where I wanted to be and the success that I strive for. And my belief is that hard work, coupled with creating and establishing a strong personal brand, can both influence and accelerate your career and get you to where you want to be. In today's episode, I'm going to be speaking to Sami Istephan. Sami is an accomplished leader specializing in developing alliance partnerships and channels, managing strategic sales and directing business development programs and strategies. Sami has worked in the communications, IT and electronics industry for over 20 years in a variety of leadership roles. He specializes in developing technology solutions and the frameworks to sell them through, and with partner organizations, and has also worked closely with some of the world's leading technology brands. He is currently VP of Global Alliances for BAE Systems. His previous roles include Global Director of Partnerships at a scale-up called Scandit, and he has also held senior partnership roles with Vodafone and BT Global Services. Sami joined Vodafone in 2014 to set up the alliance partner function, which included developing strategies to maximize alliance-led profitable business. He was also responsible for Vodafone's relationship with key systems integrators in the UK. And prior to joining Vodafone, Sami worked at BT for 16 years in a variety of sales, business development, and marketing roles. He led the BT relationship in the UK with HP, Cisco, Nortel, Avaya, and Microsoft, amongst other market-leading technology brands. Sami is an ex-board member of the Atlantic Gateway, a private-led sector regeneration think tank. He's also on the external advisory board for Salford University and a graduate of the Common Purpose Leadership Programme. In today's episode, Sami will be sharing with us why partnering is a key growth strategy in business, best practices and what makes partnerships successful, and how to handle toxic situations. He will also share his views on the future of partnering, both challenges and opportunities, and his considerations when pursuing a career path in sales, BD, and business partnering, and how you can leverage a hybrid of transferable skills to succeed in sales. So let's head over and hear what Sami has to say. Sami, good afternoon and welcome to My Brand HQ. Thank you so much for joining me here today. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Leela. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I am really, really excited about this conversation. So let's just dive straight in. And first of all, I'd like you to share with me a little bit more about where your passion comes from for unlocking the synergies, the collaboration, the partnerships, all the things that you're so heavily involved in.
Yeah, sure. So I'm never quite sure how to answer that question, to be honest, other than I've got a background, as we all have, in the work that we do and the lives that we lead, in sort of enjoying the interplay between people and seeing what makes them tick. And I think I've always done that. But then you find yourself translating that skill into a work environment where you wonder what other departments are doing and how they fit in. So I've always had this sort of image, almost like pretending I was a CEO, even when I was a very junior person, and thinking, what was a contribution? How did that work? When you're having a meeting, what is it they're looking to get out of it? So I think I'm naturally predisposed to be the kind of person that collaborates and partners because I've got an inquisitive mind. I think I'm politely saying I'm a nosy Parker.
Love it, love it. And so then tell me a bit about in terms of what you do now. Why is it that organizations select partnering as a key growth strategy? What is it about that?
Yeah, well, there are many reasons, right? But the fundamentals are most businesses look to run efficiently. Most businesses have an outlook to grow. And most businesses in some way don't do something, rely on somebody else. And so, if you wanted to, you could, I don't know, get into the handset device market, but then you might find out in the process there are a couple that do that quite well. And I've partnered with them strongly. I think we know who the obvious candidates are. So for most businesses, there's no point getting into a market where there's a preeminent leading, device manufacturer or whatever. So rather than spend the money, the millions and millions it takes to be as good as them, you partner with them. Rather than look at your own efficiencies, it's good to have a look at other businesses and where they create those efficiencies. It's probably good to partner with them because it can make you more efficient. And also, most businesses want to grow, and a quicker way to grow is to partner. So you can invest in a sales force and educate them, and develop your marketing strategies and build your product roadmaps on your own, with all your own investments, or you can look around the landscape of who you come across and who you work with, and sometimes often they're in your own supply chain, and think, do you know what, they're really good at that. Why don't we partner with them? And then this thing we're trying to do we get there quicker, more efficiently, and we get the better end result for our customers and stakeholders. But that's fundamentally, I think, that.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there is that essentially get there quicker and be more efficient about it by partnering and bringing other resources, other expertise, other skills, and collaborating in a way
Absolutely.
to be more
That's
successful.
It. Speed to market. That's one of the key things. Yeah.
And so what makes these partnerships successful, would you say?
Well, there's no magic formula, right? I think, when we talked initially, I kind of related it to any relationship, right? If you're going to have a good relationship, you've got to invest. So the secret is to not prematurely invest until you've understood what you're about and what you're trying to achieve. And then have a process to, look at the market and look at who the vendors are and who the organizations that you want to partner with that have, the most to gain and the most to give. And the process of doing that is generally held in partnering on alliance function. They're the part of a business, particularly a larger business, that spends the time thinking and worrying about those things. But it doesn't mean that I would say, just because I'm not a salesperson or a marketeer doesn't mean I'm not involved in selling and marketing. I think we're all involved in those key functions to an extent. So same with partnering, you've got to have an ownership of that function, and then work it out and look to those candidates in the near vicinity. Always go from a long list to a short list to a really short list. And then amongst that really short list is probably some gems. And you find when you start to talk to them that they would quite like to partner, or they're thinking about it. And then you just need somebody to own a plan to bolt that together into something that has an objective behind it, and then manage that process. I'm making it sound easy. It's definitely not easy, but the fundamentals are just about those key things, I think.
And so when you say it's not easy, and I can imagine it's not as simple as it sounds, what are the biggest challenges?
Well, I always say the biggest challenges are people, right? Because often the biggest beneficiaries and the biggest champions are people. But also, if you get misalignment of people, particularly senior people, that's where things start to get wobbly. So what I've found, just to share with you some experiences, that you generally don't get to sort of carry out a partnering strategy unless somebody senior is up for that or requires that as part of their growth trajectory. So assuming you've got a leader that backs you, you kind of, that's fine. The issue is that the perception of that backing might be they're going to deliver results for me next quarter. And that's not always the case with partnering. It's sometimes longer term, map to glory than the next quarter. And on occasions, that can lead to some frustration. So that's one issue: leadership alignment and perception, and the kind of pace of result that you're looking for. I think the other one is, of course, senior leaders aren't always there. And so some of the challenges I've had are when the senior leader that brought you on to give you a mandate goes off, to assume the next leader shares that mandate and shares that interest isn't always the case. And so that makes life a lot more difficult, because I think without senior level leadership, and because in partnering, you're touching on pretty much all the parts of the business. And if you don't have that senior level cover to get things done, then that makes life quite difficult, to say the least. And I think the final point I would make to you on that one is sometimes you enter into a partnership in the right spirit, but over time, bad practice can come in, and that bad practice can sour the relationship. And the euphemism is create channel conflict, but there are a whole host of things that create channel conflict. And it's often fundamentally down to we're not happy with what they did in that scenario or with that customer or what they said. And that inevitably happens with any partnership. You're going to brush up against them, and that sort of channel conflict can, if it's not managed and dealt with, sour a relationship, sometimes even very good relationships. For me, this is why it's important to have somebody owning that channel and partner interface, because they're not only there for the glory days when things are going well and to sit around having cups of coffee, which is a euphemism for what people think partnering is about, but they're there also to deal with the conflict that sometimes happens, and to have an intermediary there to say, okay, what was the issue, how do we resolve it, how do we move on from it? That's a key part of the role. So it can be some hassle associated with that, but if those things aren't recovered and they're not dealt with, then it can become toxic, and that's unfortunate, but it does happen.
Yeah, and in terms of that, and there's so many potential questions there, but what other pitfalls would you say there are to partnering potentially, other than those?
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, there are many, but they generally fall into the senior management have moved on. Performance isn't happening as quick as we'd like. It's starting to clash with our portfolio or another strategy, and the sales teams are saying, hang on a minute, that's not, you start to get sort of analytical about that lead didn't come from them, it came from us, and and all of these things kind of add up to that. And then I think, as I said, the leadership issue, but ultimately I think the plan then loses its landing gear. I always say, you can have a great idea, which are the wings of an idea, but if you don't have landing gear, you've got no way of bringing that down to ground and making it operationally efficient for the business. And so the operational efficiency of a partnership, if that's not good, if there aren't means of, setting a vision, developing the partnership, complementing the partnership with your portfolio, making sure it's aligned with salespeople. Try telling a salespeople you're going to sell something through a partner when that doesn't align with their sales plan, right? That's a bit of a challenge. But there are a whole host of reasons, but they tend to fall into those key categories, I would say.
Yeah. And it sounds one of the big things I'm hearing, having worked in sales previously, is the timeline. So my timeline might not meet your timeline because you've got slightly different objectives, and that's where potential frustrations will come in, particularly in sales, where people are all measured on performance and results. And we run the risk of that partnership. It can bring a lot of benefit and reward, but actually one side may be potentially losing out in their own mind in the short term. So it's a longer game almost. The benefits are from the longer game.
Kind of. It can be a short-term game, it can be a mid-term game. I know I'm trying to sort of explain it all, but the art here is to start with a partnering model that fits the business that you're wanting to do. If you're looking for short-term fix, typically in the continuum of partnering, you might be looking for a resale partner. You can go to a resale partner, quite quickly and agree some commercial terms, and they're quite short, and you can have access to a volume market quite quickly, and the returns therefore are quite quick. There's nothing wrong with that if that's into your strategy and fits with what you're doing and can be managed in an efficient way, and there's a market opportunity. That's great. But there's a whole spectrum from a resale partner, key to any organization, because that's the volume, the lifeblood of interactions that take place, all the way up to a strategic alliance partner. And the opposite of that resale partner is a strategic alliance partner is often trying to do something very unique, maybe at very high capacity with lots of complexity, might be multi-geography, might be in a highly regulated environment, might be in market areas you're not familiar with. All of that adds complication to the partnering model. But there'd be no point in saying strategic alliance partner would have the same turnaround time as a resale partner. They've just got different timescales associated with them. And I think the clever business, and I've been lucky enough to work, still do, for some clever businesses, they realize, you're either going to focus on one area and do it really well, or you're going to have a complete ecosystem of partners to satisfy different needs of your strategy. And the latter can just literally be one person, an alliance lead, looking after a really key strategic partner that your business is fundamentally connected to. Or it can be, sometimes I've worked in quite large teams who manage a whole gamut of resell or indirect partners, transacting on a daily, hourly basis sometimes. And, businesses decide where they want to get the value from partnering amongst that continuum.
So I guess if there's a business looking to partner, some of the things to consider are: what is their strategies, short-term, long-term, what are their ultimate objectives, and then finding a partner, a potential partner that aligns with that.
Absolutely. And funnily enough, even though I haven't done a consulting exercise with you, I kind of boiled it down to about 8 things, which I won't tell you because the 8 things I usually charge people for. but yeah, fundamentally, it's down to a few of those things, and a few things that it has to be complementary. There's no point in having a capability that you have in-house or conflicts with a capability that you've got in-house. You have to have an addressable market that you jointly go for and have a benefit of doing it together. It has to be something that's incremental. So there's no point in doing it if you're just going to get the same market share by doing it yourself. So in addition to the things you said, Layla, I think there's other additional things I would say. And all of that has to be quantified and analyzed and then owned and maintained. And when it goes wrong, somebody has to say, okay, understanding to get this right. Somebody has to own that. And it's usually the domain, not exclusively, but usually the domain of somebody in a partnering or alliance lead, be they in a function that's been determined, put in place to do that. Or sometimes it's part of a product line. Sometimes it's part of a strategy unit or a commercial team. Sometimes it sits in a sales organization. I've got views about where's the best place to put it. That might be a future question of yours. I don't know.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, if someone's listening to you now and thinking, in terms of a career move, this sounds like somewhere they'd like to be, what would you say, first of all, what are the characteristics you think, the strengths someone would require to be really successful in this environment?
I think because I see it as the sort of interface between lots of functions in an organization, then I think you have to be a hybrid. So the problem, if you're a pure technologist, then you can get very wrapped up in the technology and you're great at the road mapping elements and you can interface at a tech level and translate till the cows come home on what the techie means, that's great. If you're a sales guy, you can be a good communicator and translator, but you don't necessarily understand the technology or the roadmap or interface. There are pros and cons. I've seen commercial people do it very well because partnering off at a point gets down to how do you formalize it? What's the business plan? There are elements of that, as you will know, given your background, that involve, the numbers and the governance of a partnership. In partnering, you have to be mindful of all of those things and represent all of those things. It doesn't mean you have to have every one of those skills, but it helps if you have an appreciation of all of those things. And so what I look for are hybrids in terms of skill sets. And I think that's what, going back a while now, when I started my career as a product marketeer, and then I went into sort of more business development, and then just really stumbled on partnering as something I just gravitated towards, and as I said, just loved, and I can't see myself not doing it, even if I don't have a title that encompasses partnering. I just think it's inherent in how I like to do things. And so I kind of look for hybrids. You don't have to be the finished complete article, but somebody who has that ability to understand what's going to make the finance guys appreciate this. How can I explain that to the product engineers? And when it gets to the sales guys communicating it to their customers, how they're going to be able to do this, to explain why we're in partnership with this organization. All of those things have to be, I think they're hybrid skills, and they have to be part of the skill set of a product or alliance, a partner or alliance person.
Yeah. And so taking that into account, if somebody was thinking they meet those requirements, what else would they need to be considering, do you think, if they were looking to pursue a similar career path to yours, other than having the skills, that sort of knowledge? What else should they be aware of?
Yeah, I think it comes, experience is great. And I think when I've been involved in mentoring people or coaching my team, I always say, if you're younger, it doesn't really matter your age, to be honest, but if you're in the formulative stages and not showing what you want to do, keep it broad. Learn about what you're doing, do it as well as you can, and in that process try and understand what is it that makes you tick about the things you've got to do, because mostly stuff at work which we hate, stuff that's sort of okay we can put up with, but hopefully if we're happy people, there's some few things that we're really good at. And I get to know what those things are that you're really good at and that you really like, and keep that experience broad. And then for partnering, look to those parts of your organization that do it well. It might not be the partnering function, there might not be a partnering function, but look to the bits that you see where partnering works well, and expose yourself to other parts of the business that can coach and mentor you, or just have an informal conversation. It doesn't have to be a formal coaching and mentoring, but have a conversation with people and gravitate towards that. And all I can say is, in my experience, that process of refining what you like and then taking it to the next level, and then realizing you might come to the end of a cycle in a particular business, but hey, another door opens over there. That's the way. It doesn't sound particularly planned, does it? Because I suppose it wasn't, but that's the way my career developed. I never thought that far ahead. I think I always thought of what I enjoyed, how I could get better at doing that, and opportunities came my way. And I don't see that's any different nowadays. Yeah.
And I really like that.
Be a good listener as well, Leela. That's the key, I think, which I'm not demonstrating by doing all this talking. But yes, I think it's key to be a listener, to understand another person's perspective.
Yeah, and first of all, I really like what you shared there, because this is something I kind of advocate to my clients a lot when they're looking for career moves, is rather than looking at job titles, it's what are you really passionate about and what energizes you. Because oftentimes people say, well, I use the example of a business analyst. I want to be a business analyst, and actually for me, a business analyst in one organization, the role itself could be very different to the same job title in another organization. So rather than looking at job titles, just drilling down into what do I want to be doing? How do I want to be spending my working days? What really excites me, energizes me, lights me up, rather than necessarily what I'm good at, because there's sometimes things that light you up, but you can still work to develop those skills, hone them, master them. So invest time and energy to do that.
Yeah.
Then you'll be able to actually look at what you do day to day and say, I really love my job, because 90% of it is things that I love to do.
Yeah.
So I love what you've just shared there. And you kind of answered one of my other questions, which is, if you've got somebody who's already working in tech as an industry, and for example, they might be in a marketing role and they want to, let's use the latest word, pivot their career to business development or sales.
Yeah.
It sounds from what you've just been explaining, it's something that's doable. It's not impossible.
Oh, Definitely doable. In fact, sales is one of those crosshatch areas where they're looking for people with a different angle, primarily because when we go and talk to customers, there's no one type of customer. You might be talking to highly commercial customer, you might be talking to a CFO. Having a finance background would be really quite good in those interchanges. Understanding technology, if you're an engineer, super skills. So if you want to go down the sales business development sort of partnering route, there's no kind of bad background in a way. There's only good, especially people that realize it and can turn it into something sort of profitable for a company. They're the real gems, aren't they? But I would say, like just repeating the point, if you're not sure but you want to go, either find a mentor or just put yourself in the zone of people who you sort of admire. We all do it, don't we? When we go to a meeting, we join a company, we go to a meeting, there's somebody that emerges out of a group of people or a few people that you think, do you know what, really quite interesting, aren't they? Not quite sure why, but I like their approach, I like the way they put things. Just invest some time in them. Do you know, actually, I've done that and benefited massively from that throughout my career, just being around kind people that were far cleverer than me, more senior than me. And I got a lot from that. But kind of tables have turned a little bit for me, but I'm now realizing that you get a lot from that as well. So there's a definite need to do that in any business, however large. Big fan of coaching and mentoring. It's the way to traverse those what should I do, where do I go next kind of conversations.
Yeah, and I couldn't say that better myself. I totally agree with you on a number of levels there. So I think, first of all, it's a win-win for both. So mentoring others and approaching a mentor, there's a win-win on both sides. And I always advocate looking for mentors, and they can be informal and they can be formal. I've had both. And the other thing is, people love to help. I was speaking to someone just, I think it was on Monday, about this, and someone who's looking to pivot in their career, and I suggested reaching out, asking for help, and I was like, oh, but I've not spoken to that person for 5 years. Actually, just rekindle that relationship. And I always say, especially now with what we're going through, this global pandemic, it's a great time to consider rekindling relationships, because people want connection. They want to be able to chat to people, and maybe they're possibly talking daily to their colleagues, their team, but actually it's refreshing to have a different conversation. And every conversation, I believe, can create an unexpected opportunity. It can potentially be life-changing. So it's always important to be expanding your network and also surrounding yourself with people who do support you, are in some way mentors or advocates for you, because it can make a huge difference to where your career goes.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, that the philosophy of that is very sound. What have you got to lose? If you want to learn and progress, what have you got to lose? The only caveat I would add, and this is a mistake I think I made some time ago, you don't necessarily have to choose people that you are similar to. In fact, it's often better to choose somebody that's quite different to you. So it's not about I'm picking you, or I'd like to pick you because you're like me, or I like you. I think it's just down to, there's something about you that I'd like to learn from. Don't just pick the friendly faces. Don't just pick the one that you think's most like you. That's key to choosing the right mentor. Don't be afraid of making mistakes as well. I mean, I had a few after the first meeting. I thought, you're not anything like I thought you were. But then I've had some that I've, 10 years later, they're still there. To this day, the relationship goes beyond just you as an employee or as a part of a program for them. They are there. If I have a big career dilemma, I'll pick up the phone to those people. They help me. So that's I've got so much out of it. I would really encourage anybody to try the same. Give it a go.
Yeah, I'm absolutely in support of that as well, and particularly, as you say, to have a diverse mix of people that you can reach out to. It's not just about, if you're in finance, reach out to people who are in finance, but also you get a different perspective by having that diverse network around you. So absolutely agree. And the other thing I was going to mention is, you talked about different career paths and different backgrounds and strengths, and still being able to move into sales. And actually, as you said, I thought, well, that's what I did without kind of strategically planning it out.
Yeah.
Initially at the outset of my career, I was an accountant, I was working in finance. I ended up being in sales, but actually because I was in a financial services part of the business, it was important to be able to have a meaningful conversation with the finance people, with the CFO, about the benefits of what we were proposing. So as you
absolutely
say, it's drawing on the transferable skills and what you have got, rather than looking at what you don't have, to be able to make a successful transition.
Completely. And it's realizing them. And lots of people just don't realize what their transferable skills are. They think, this is what I did my degree in, this is where my experience lies. I think, you got to have a different mindset to really utilize those transferable skills. But and sometimes you need help to do that. It doesn't come out naturally. But yeah.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I love it. And so just going back a little bit, you mentioned earlier about how so situations in partnerships where they can potentially become toxic. So a couple of questions on that. First of all, have you ever personally witnessed a situation like that?
Yes, more than one. They can get quite hairy because emotions are high, right? Usually there's something that's instigated it, and people care. If you're in an environment where people care, and sometimes people lose it. It's not pretty often. I'm a great believer in passion, but yes, I have experienced that. In fact, it kind of on a small scale, it's a day-to-day, because as I said to you, there's conflict that's created through partnering. I might get the analogy wrong, but there's some kind of analogy, which is if you want to go fast, go it alone. If you want to be highly successful, then partner. And what that means is that when you're partnering, and I may have messed that analogy up, Leela, apologies to those who know it better than I, but it generally means that if you want to partner, it adds more complication to what you're doing, because you've got somebody else's perspective to consider before you do anything. It's a lot easier to just do it, right? I like analogies, and this is one I won't get wrong, but I always think I use the marriage analogy, which only works to an extent, so bear with me. But if you're a single man or woman, and you're not married, you've got lots of freedom, you can do lots of things, you can achieve what you want to achieve, and life is more straightforward in that sense. Not everybody, but some people get married, and some people have relationships. You could say partnerships, and life becomes a bit more complicated, doesn't it? Because we can't just do what we want to do. We've got to do something that's sympathetic and empathetic with what other people want to do, and you start to consider other things. And don't get me on to when that leads to kids and all the other stuff that comes in life. But the point is fundamental to partnering, which is that, ultimately, if you're not fulfilled by partnering and you don't get something from it, you kind of move on. And just to go to your point, where the toxic moments come in is usually when the partnership has led its course and just come to a point when really it should switch. I'm trying to avoid pivot because you've used that quite well a couple of times, but maybe I should say pivot. But it should pivot from where it was intended originally to something else. And sometimes it can pivot just to a different type of partnership, or out of a partnership into a supply chain relationship or a product relationship or some other relationship that the company wants to hold. It doesn't have to be partnering. Often, and a key to partnering is having a joint ambition together, but that nearly all, by definition, has a timescale associated with it. And where it gets kind of toxic is when you've done what you intended to do, or crucially, you didn't do what you intended to do, but it goes on and you're ticking the boxes. And it's at that point you need to realize we need to park it or change it, pivot it, transform it. And again, it's just managing, rather than that being over lots of years, months, wasted time of not realizing that, you're not getting what you wanted out of it. If you manage that process and deal with those issues early, you come to those conclusions much quicker, and you can avoid the toxicity that you get on some occasions. Almost inevitably, you'll get on some occasions.
And I'm guessing then, in handling a situation like that, one of the big things to consider is communication.
Absolutely.
It's open communication, transparency.
Yeah. It's fundamental. I mean, it's fundamental in an organization and within a team. and within an individual, right? But when you're talking to two organizations who have different, different modus operandi, you have to have that communication, because as a partnership lead, you're often the translator. So what you need to be really careful of, especially in tech, by the way, where we got so many acronyms and ways of explaining things, and then you've got certain businesses that have a way to discuss things or explain things that another business might not have, and all of that gets really complicated. That's even before you go to global models where you're having to translate, a vision to, I don't know, an Asia Pac audience versus a North American, South American. It gets messy. So communications are absolutely key, and being crystal clear is the essence of it. But having that opportunity to communicate, and you could take the word governance almost in this scenario and put communicate regularly. That's also key. And for me, you haven't asked this question, but for me, it's interesting to know, since our ways of communication have changed so much, have they not, in this last year, how we're going to deal with that, how we can build, because what I'm talking about is heavily relationship orientated, and that's okay to maintain relationships like this, but can we do it from scratch? The art of communication isn't something you just take as read. We have to think about these things a lot, and I think you're right to point that out, because it's communication that's one of those things that can just change things and take them in a different direction to what you may have intended.
Yeah, and actually I've not asked it, but it kind of leads me into another question I did have, which was so for the future, what the future looks like. What are the biggest challenges and opportunities, do you think, for partnering? And that's a big question, because that brings in how things have changed in the last year, communication. At the end of the day, all of what we're talking about here is about relationships ultimately.
Yeah.
So what are your views on that?
So I've got a few views, but some of them are counter views, right? So the fundamentals of partnering, I think, are just there. The things I talked about earlier on, those things aren't going to change. We still fundamentally trust and deal and transact with people that we know and that we can communicate to. Those lines of communication might change, as we discussed, but that will continue. I think, however, in the post-COVID world, there's a greater emphasis on other alternative lines of communication, and so translating partnering models to those lines of communication are key. And I'm not just talking about sort of Zoom calling and WebExing and the like. I'm talking about, how do you share market intel with an organization? How do you do the due diligence around partnering? What's the process in which you manage and governance partnerships? All of that goes beyond just the sort of reviewing stage. How do we build trust with organizations when we only know them to an extent via an electronic digitized means? So I think those things, we just have to find new vehicles for doing them. And I think technology is going to help some way. But I think, so for example, the advent of cloud as a business paradigm, as a different way of doing business, creates an opportunity to automate if you like, the management of partnerships and business and transactions into business, into governmental. It helps that, but it also raises a lot of questions about how safe is that transaction. How fully encouraged are you to do something for a company when you've never met them, you've only ever interacted with them digitally? Those are things that in not that long ago, I would be doing that in face-to-face workshops and building that relationship, those intimacies, by sharing board-to-board meetings. That's one of the things that, if you're really working with a partnership, that if your businesses have become so, interdependent, then you find they start doing things like invite you to their team meetings. And a couple of partnerships I've had, we go to their head offices and they give us access to research and development information that they normally wouldn't share outside the business, and you end up having board-to-board meetings with their boards and non-exec directors. And these are all signs of a company becoming so enshrined and entrusting in each other that they kind of open up and communicate. But how will that go? How will that be going forward? That's I think there'll be more technology. We'll have a more cloud paradigm to the way we interact. Probably be more automation around how we deal with onboarding a relationship and the transactional part. But I still think there's a key role for the individual who has the remit to partner with another person in another organization to extract value for both. I still think that fundamental human skill set will still be required.
No, definitely agree with that. And what about opportunities, do you think, for partnerships in the future?
Well, I think there are loads. Partly because everybody seems to, it's sort of an adjunct to everybody's title nowadays. Partner this. You might have been a salesperson in the past. Now you're a partner salesperson. Or there's loads of partnering, but I think there's also a huge amounts of mistakes that are made in partnering. And my hope is that those companies who've invested quickly in it don't then just subsequently leave it because they thought it didn't work for them. I hope they find different ways of making it work for them, because I see a lot of organizations who pick up the partner mantle as a quick fix, quick cure for not having enough salespeople, or not having reaching a particular vertical, or not having sort of enough bodies in a particular geography to do technical analysis on XYZ. There are loads of reasons, but I think if you don't extract the value, then those reasons become obsolete. So you have to kind of find the right model, and it's not a one size fits all, one way does all. It's a bit, unfortunately or fortunately, it's a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah. And so tell me then, on the basis of what the future looks like, is it possible for smaller organizations to partner with the large ones? Is that a good?
I think it depends on your definition of partner, right? But when I talked about the continuum of partnering and there's a sort of resell sort of transactional end of it, often, these things have always happened in the past, but the level of tech help and tech autonomy that's happening in that space will definitely help larger organizations reach out and interact better with smaller organizations. How well that works, I think remains to be seen. So I think it depends on your definition of partnering to answer your question. If you want a more strategic or value add partnership, then I do think it becomes more difficult. I think the onus is on, given that we're trying to find value that complements from both partners that can go to market, it doesn't exclude a very small business that has some super cool tech IPR that a large business doesn't have, but could unlock huge potential for that large business. So in those scenarios, there is a route to a small business and a large business working well. But I think often it's difficult because the expectations and the timescales and the language, the way they communicate, and their perception of return and value on return are so different. It does make things difficult. It's certainly not impossible. In fact, I've experienced it on a number of occasions where it's worked very well. But I would just say, from my perspective, who is listening to this, that's from a big company perspective, looking at small companies. That it might be if you talk to somebody from a small, tech startup. Although I've worked for one, mostly my time has been from a big company perspective. You'd have to ask the smaller company whether they get something out of it too.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes complete sense. And I think one thing I'd be interested to hear from you, and I think you've kind of touched on it along the way, is when it comes to effective collaboration and developing these strategic alliances and partnerships, what would you say is best practice? So if you were to give me, say, 2 or 3 things that people should be thinking about.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give you 3 things, because I think they're the fundamentals, and it will maybe repeat what I've said before, but the fundamental is trust. I think if you don't have trust, you start on the wrong basis. You never have complete trust, by the way. Trust is something you never take for granted, you keep building, but trust is one. Then you need to have, I kind of think of it as the vision. So what is it you want to do together? Why is doing it together better than doing it separately? And that has to be a joint ambition, by the way. There's no point in going back to your previous question, a bigger partner saying, we think that is where the future of the market's going, and then the smaller partner kind of goes along scared to disagree that that's actually not what they think. So having a vision of what you want to do, and that includes things like addressable markets and where the tech kind of complements. And then the final thing is having a plan. So don't assume because you're trusting somebody and you're working with somebody that you don't need a plan. The key to success is reminding people a year down the line that your original vision, and often we use the word go-to-market or joint go-to-market, was this. If it has changed, then let's agree it's changed. But if it hasn't, then these are objectives we're looking to do. And some of them are hard objectives, usually numbers. Some of them are softer objectives, how many case studies can we develop? How many solution sets in different verticals can we go for? Things like that. So I think it's the key three things, trust, vision, and having a plan to support the other two.
And I think from what you've said there, it's almost obvious that plan is more important if you're in a partnership, because you're bringing two, like a relationship, as you say, you're bringing two people together. It's always, or businesses, always going to create some amount of complexity. So a plan becomes even more important to that point than even if you didn't have one on your own. The
joint plan, and that's the key thing. You see, whenever I insist on it being a joint plan. So you don't want a dominant partner. It's often not helpful to have a dominant partner, or a partner needs to know what their contribution is to the overall objective. So having a joint plan is key, a good joint plan, and then having that joint plan regularly reviewed at various levels in the organization is also key. I think I've mentioned it before, but I think I dwell too much on the top end seniors. But the joint plan will often have sort of governance that is at a product level. So having somebody from a portfolio and engineering perspective, you're dealing with a counterpart in your partner organization or organizations, because remember, partnering can be more than one organization joining together, can be a number of them with the same objective. And alignment with the operational people, so the sign-on process is the same. You need to get legal people in to make sure we've got the kind of commercial terms appropriate. So the plan really operationalizes those things and has a way of governing in them, and that's absolutely, it's not the exciting bit of it perhaps, but that's absolutely key.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. So tell me, I know you've led sophisticated teams in complex technology-based markets and delivered incredible business value. So what are the core attributes that you would look for when you're hiring into those teams?
So I like hybrid teams. I think I mentioned it before. So I don't have a template of you need to be like this. I like to have teams that are made up of different skill sets, because if you're in a hybrid area, to have somebody in the team with, even if you're not, nobody's ever got all those skills. So I do like to have people that are very good at the analysis, and certain people from certain backgrounds very good at that, commercial backgrounds, typically accounting backgrounds. But I also like to have creative people and people in the team who have an ability to think out of the box. Sorry for the phrase, and often, not always, but are good communicators. And then you need some people with some technical knowledge. So for me, the best teams I've managed have been a combination of sort of out and out sales skills with some technical skills, some market know-how, and an understanding, let's say, of key organizational functions. So you know how to get those guys on side, and at a point you need to systemize what you're doing. Your operational plan has all those feeds into the way an organization, for example, signs off bids and commercial activities. Having all of that ideally is a skill set that you should try and incorporate in your team. And if you don't have that, so long as you've got the autonomy to sort of delve into that. So larger organizations have the benefit of all of those functions in one team. A smaller business or a medium-sized business, which I've worked for some time ago, but they would have a point person that say sits in the accounts department, that would be your partner allocated person to lead. It doesn't have to be a literal member of your team. It could be a virtual member of your team. But having that broad set of skills for me is key to making a partner function work well in, as you rightly say, in a complex world. Because you need the landing gear, not just the wings, remember.
Absolutely. And what's really encouraging as well about what you just said is that, for people who are maybe looking to pivot, to change, to do something a bit different, but to leverage their transferable skills, there are great opportunities here to go out, try something new.
Yeah.
Bringing the skills they've got and upskilling, learning new things, challenging themselves in a way. So it's really encouraging to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing, in the years I've employed people into my team, how the people who you think are going to be a natural fit and just go for it kind of they're not always the ones that give you the return. And that sort of investment in somebody who just shows the right spark and has come in to the team and has made a difference. I don't think there's a magic formula, because I've been sometimes amazed by the people who just come in, don't have any necessarily sales background, but have just taken to it and off they go. And then you talk to the senior heads in the partnership that you're working with, and you say, well, goodness me, we're just doing great guns because this individual has made life so much easier for us. We understand, it's lovely when you hear that from a team member, and then you see the results that come from it. That's when you've made a good choice, I guess.
Yeah. And it reminds me a little bit of when I was in sales, actually, and people coming in who are pure sales people, but also we had, like myself and also my finance director during a period of time, sales director, who would also come from a finance background. And you can see there was different aspects, different perspectives that we could bring in to improve existing, whether it's processes, the approach, the way we have a conversation with people, that perhaps coming from a purely sales environment, you wouldn't have had that exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's fundamental to it. And frankly, the teams I've been happiest working in, not just managing, have been those with that breadth of skill set. They're not all the same people. They've got different things to offer, and they're the ones that probably hardest to manage, to be honest, because there's not one thing that their hygiene factors are this. They're probably the hardest to manage. But I guess I think you get any senior leader that it's kind of fundamental to have the people around you to be the best at what they do, and it's never just one mono thing. It's usually a series of things that the team can do to make transformative change. It's complex. Means you can't just click in a person with these set skills and this age of person, this profile. It doesn't work like that. It's complex, so you need to invest in the dynamic of the team, I guess.
Totally. And given that complexity that you just talked about, what would you say has been your biggest challenge in managing one of those teams, or and also have you overcome that?
Yeah, look, biggest challenge is tricky because it depends what do you mean by biggest. But for me, the transition between one leadership team and another, when the emphasis of partnering changes, has been the biggest challenge. Because you've done what you think is the right thing, and then something's changed, but you're not quite sure what the new world looks like. And then you sort of feel okay with that uncertainty yourself, but that has an effect on other people. And so that they're the biggest challenges for me, when you can't be straightforward with the people that are in your team. I find that challenging, because you feel part of you feels like you're letting them down. So probably for me, when I've been the most challenged has been in those environments when things have changed, can't quite be transparent with my team because I'm not sure where it's going, and that's probably the hardest bit for me, I think.
Yeah, and then actually you can probably relate that, and people listening to this can relate if they're in that position right now as a leader of a team. There's so much uncertainty within the business, the environment, potentially the industry, and it's difficult to keep that team and morale and keep them motivated when nobody knows what's around the corner for us.
absolutely is a challenge, isn't it? And I think it was anyway, but ever more so in the environment we're in. But yeah, we're all dealing with it in our own way. And I think the worst thing is, I'm not here to talk about in general well-being things, but it's just, it goes back to what you said, actually, communication, isn't it? I find that things might not change, but if you can communicate what worries you, where you'd like to go, what you'd like to do, it's when the communication breaks down, that's a real sign of things, not going well. So I'm actively communicating as much as I can. I do sometimes over communicate, but that's another that's another thing.
And I open communication is huge, and I think it's something I've been talking a lot about recently, whether it's in training or on, I'm doing some lives at the moment on LinkedIn, and that's come up a lot. It's about being open about communication, being transparent, and checking in with people on a regular basis, particularly when right now so many people are feeling isolated and they are working remotely. Is having someone that you can reach out to, but also being aware of what's being kept in the loop and being aware of what's going on.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah.
So just to wrap this up, Sami, my last question for you is what has been your biggest accomplishment in your career, would you say?
I've been lucky. So I think I would probably, there's a period, might do a name check here as well, actually. Yeah, why not? So there's a period of my career around 2014, 15, just going into 16, where I headed the partner and system integration function at Vodafone, and I loved that role, really loved that role. And why did I love it? Because for the first time in my career, I had a relatively clean piece of paper to build a team, had a really supportive line manager and leadership team that gave me the autonomy to do, within reason, what I wanted to do. And over that 3-4 year period, we chose some partners, onboarded some partners, and did some really good business with those partners. Sort of that to this day I'm very proud of. Built the team from just little old me to some really talented and just super cool people that many of whom I still keep in touch with and are doing well. And so for me, that sort of halcyon 2 or 3 years there in a super company that gave me the remit to do what I wanted to do, that was probably the highlight for me. Going to various partner summits, by the way, we do like to congratulate ourselves in the partnering world and winning lots of awards, particularly when it's in the face of some of your competitors. That plays to the ego a little bit as well. So yeah, all of that, those 2 or 3 years at Vodafone, for me, probably the highlight. So far. Got more to come,
Of course. That's only the beginning.
Indeed.
That gives me goosebumps listening to that, actually, what you said there, because I think for me, I'd say one of probably the most, I'd say both challenging but rewarding parts of my career is when I joined EDS, actually, and it was almost like a bit of a blank slate to go put things in place, create things, and with the financing portfolio they had. So yeah, and it is great when you get to go in and create change or create something new, because it's a challenge, but also it can be rewarding to see the output of that and the impact of it.
Yeah.
So Sami, I would like to say a huge thank you for taking time out to chat with me. This has been an absolute pleasure. And for those of you listening who would love to hear more about all the aspects of partnering and collaboration that Sami's been sharing today, you can find the link to his LinkedIn profile in the show notes. So do reach out and just drop him a little message if you'd like to connect with him and have a chat further. Thank you, Sami. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure, Layla. Take care.
Okay. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please do subscribe to the show so you don't miss any future episodes. And remember to leave a review telling us about your key learnings and what you enjoyed the most. And do share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can spread the word on the importance of personal branding when it comes to your career advancement, and also ensure that others can benefit from these invaluable insights from many inspirational leaders. I will be eternally grateful. And if you are looking to earn more money, to get promoted, to secure your next role and advance your career, and would like me to support you personally on that journey to get you there, then reach out to me and let's arrange a chat. Alternatively, why don't you check out my personal branding launchpad, a group training and mentoring program. Finally, if you'd like to connect with me directly, then do reach out and direct message me on LinkedIn. You can find the link as well as any other resources mentioned in the show notes. I'll see you next time.